to have FBI agents calling you courageous is kind of interesting.
Today on the show, we are joined by Jean South. As a former FBI special agent who has worked to disrupt violent gangs and Russian organized criminal groups, she's now turned her attention to helping military veterans and companies find each other. Listen as she shares her personal journey and her passion to help veterans transition into the civilian workforce. This is The Career Cue, the podcast focused on helping you navigate the signals in your career to keep you growing and moving forward in business and in life. Here's today's host, Stacey Harris.
So welcome to The Career Cue, Jean. It's so great to be able to talk to you today.
It's so awesome to be here. I've been looking forward to this.
I'm excited to share the story of Higher Served and the fantastic work that you and your team are doing, but also sharing a little bit more about your professional story and how you got to today as well. This is definitely a conversation that I'm excited to share with as many people as possible. So do you mind sharing a little bit about how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually going to blame my high school boyfriend. So,
who shall remain nameless?
He shall remain nameless. No, we were dating when I was in school, and he was in the police academy, and I'd always had this fascination with law enforcement. And he had an instructor tell him, "You're too smart not to use it. You really should think." Kind of dream some big dreams. Think about going federal. Think about something that's going to take you out of kind of your local comfort zone, because he'd grown up in the same area. And I remember being like, well, I'm smart. I could be a federal agent. I
like
do that.
Yes.
Right. And all of a sudden, I kind of found this thing inside of myself that I actually didn't know I wanted, because I hadn't been walking around saying I want to be an FBI agent when I grow up. And suddenly I was walking around going, I think I might want to be an FBI agent when I grow up.
Nice.
So I blame him completely. But then I actually didn't really tell anyone other than a few very close people about that, because I wasn't confident I could do it. And I'm very competitive. And unless I'm really positive that I can just knock it out of the water, I tend to not tell everybody this is what I'm doing next. And so I didn't really say anything. I went to school, got an undergrad in psychology. I did my senior thesis on psychological profiling of serial killers and whether it's a means to valid capture and conviction of serial killers. So of course that immersed me in the FBI a little bit, and also a lot of things that most people could not read and then sleep, but I didn't lose too much sleep.
Just a little light reading. Yes.
Yeah. It was, people would come over and my roommates' friends would look at my books and just be like, oh my God, should we save you? Do you need us to get rid of here? And so I did that, but then just wasn't quite ready. Wasn't time, and timing wise for the Bureau, you have to be a certain age, certain amount of experience before you can apply. So I went into banking and went ahead and got my master's degree, because as everyone knows, a degree in psychology is a degree in retail. So decided that I was going to actually need something in theory marketable. So I got an MBA in finance and went into banking. And one day was sitting at my desk at the bank and just kind of went, oh my God, what am I doing? This is not what I want. This is not my dream. And if I fail, if I try and fail and they don't let me into the FBI, then I'm just one of a lot of people who are actually amazing people who didn't get in, because it's pretty hard. But if I never try, I will always regret this. And so that day I started making some phone calls, getting in touch with people, and started trying to figure out how in the world does one apply to be an FBI agent. So after that, got in. I actually ended up with a friend who knew an agent who was able to walk me through the process. Because of my MBA and my securities licenses, someone looked at me and thought, hey, this would be a great person for white collar type crimes. So I entered the FBI Academy on January 23rd, 2005. Exited on May 24th, 2005. Those days are ingrained in my mind and will probably never leave. And went straight to Albuquerque, New Mexico, where I ended up running a violent gang task force, which made zero sense considering I had an MBA in finance.
Wow. We are just like jaws on the ground right now. Like, yikes. Okay. So this takes our, oh my gosh, my email didn't go through problems that we deal with. It's a little less important, right?
It does put things in perspective.
Oh my gosh, the email server went down. What are we going to do? You know what? There are bigger issues in the world. Yes. Okay.
Well, the thing I loved out in Albuquerque was, I walked in, I had never been on the streets. I'd never been a cop. I was completely uneducated about gangs. Albuquerque's gangs are actually quite different than the rest of the world's gangs, things you wouldn't really think about. And I walked in and basically within 2 months, I was running a task force. And so the thing I learned there was I didn't have to know everything. I just had to have resources, know how to find everything. And for me, it was really about humility and walking into the police department and saying, listen, I get that I don't know what I'm doing. And I get that you're probably looking at me and thinking, because I was extremely young at the time too, right? So very young girl shows up and acts like I have a clue. It wasn't gonna fly. And so I just said, I will bring whatever resources to bear that the FBI has provided me. Please teach me. And so the beauty of that was the officers felt the respect that I felt for them. And I got an amazing education. We were on the streets and they taught me some incredible things. I was always the gang task force member who would be looking around and being like, oh my God, that's drugs? What is that? That's what that looks. I didn't know. I was this good little girl, right? So we were doing something and there was meth and someone had some meth and I'm like, oh, that's so cool looking. And they're like, Jean, that's meth. Oh, less cool looking. What do we do with it? Yeah, I learned a lot about humility and just learning every lesson I could. But more importantly, that's when I learned and began to learn the importance of making connections and being able to take officers who were all in the same area but on different police forces and bring everybody into a room and say, okay, what's our common cause? Why are we here? And what's the biggest problem we as a group need to confront? And so we brought everyone together. We put everybody on one problem. And when you put the best of the best all on the same problem, you get some really cool effects, right? And you get results a lot faster. So it actually allowed us to work through problems with a different approach because we were talking, we were sharing information, we were on the same team instead of the standard that you run into, unfortunately, in any organization of people trying to claim credit for something so they keep a little piece of information to themselves. And in law enforcement, that can actually become dangerous and even deadly. Mm-hmm. So that's where I feel like my natural connecting ability really showed up in such an important way. And that was the first time I really felt like, you know what, the fact that I know how to talk to people and make everybody play nice is actually changing the world a little bit,
That's great because it was bigger than you, right?
It was. Yeah. So I left there. I got married. My husband and I got married, and he is in government service. So I got moved to where he was. And so then I moved to Philadelphia and they put me on a Russian organized crime squad where I all of a sudden was working Russian organized crime and anti-money laundering and all kinds of things I had zero exposure to ever before. So I was back to square one. I was back to learning, frantically reading books and reading cases and trying desperately to figure out where I was going to learn about the Russian mafia, not from, the Viggo Mortensen film, right? But actual legit facts. So I did that and actually ended up running another task force, but it was even cooler because we actually brought in private industry, which doesn't happen very often in law enforcement. So we actually were working with some of our private industry partners as well as one another. And that was incredible. So yeah, I had this amazing experience working with Russian organized crime and then had this opportunity to go to Russian language school. So I actually speak passable Russian, although it's been a few years, so don't test me on it necessarily. But had a really awesome opportunity to go to school, learn to speak Russian, and then became specialized in what's called human intelligence. And so within all of the services that work to keep us all safe, we all recognize that the most important kind of information is what we call human intelligence. It's information that we get from people who are in a position to kind of assist. And it's rarely in that person's best interest to do that because generally, if you think about it, these are the people we call narcs. These are the people we call snitches. These are the people who get made dead really by governments if it's found out. And so we're asking some pretty high things of people. And within that, there's a lot of training that goes along with understanding how to build a relationship such that a person would trust you with their life and be willing to tell you their secrets in order to keep our nation safe. And so I went through multiple schools for that. And my specialty then became Russian human intelligence. And so I spent a lot of time in the Russian community and just getting to know those individuals. And when I say Russian, I mean really the former Soviet bloc, right? Everyone who speaks Russian and grew up speaking it, but that includes Ukraine, places like that. So that became my specialty. That became what I did for a living. And then after a little while, it became time for me to switch again. And, if you look at it, I already had a lot of career switches within the Bureau. I just had that same title, but I'd already switched 3 times. But at this point in my career, I decided to really shake things up and kind of shock the world. I decided I was going to leave the Bureau altogether, which is kind of not done.
Okay. So that's interesting. Okay, we'll get into that. But okay, so take us.
Historically, people, once you join the FBI, you stay for life. You retire either when you're first eligible, which is after you're 50, or when you're mandatory, which is at your 57th birthday. And then you have people who actually will put in to stay. So some people every year petition to be allowed to stay just one more year, just one more year, just one more year. And then you had me saying, oh, I've had 9 years. This has been good. I'm out. And it confused a lot of people.
Yeah. You kind of reached your ceiling, right? Your personal ceiling within that particular organization.
Yeah. I had hit the place where I wasn't growing as quickly as I wanted to be. I wasn't challenged in the ways I wanted to be challenged. And I understood that though I loved the organization, essentially I was in my mid-30s. And if I wanted to make a career switch, and, I did have that MBA and I did have some aspirations to work in private industry, I felt like if I wanted to make a switch, I was going to have to do it pretty quickly because if I waited too terribly long, I was going to be starting over again in a cycle of life that I wasn't sure I wanted to be when I was starting over again.
There's clearly a job description, right, to become an FBI agent. There's almost a script when it comes to a traditional career within the agency, and that a lot of people subscribe to that because that's what fits their goals and their agenda for their own professional growth and development. But that you decided that perhaps wasn't going to be the script that you wanted to follow. And I'm guessing that you had a few people that perhaps shared their opinions with you about that decision.
Yeah. There were opinions. Yeah. I think my favorite thing I have 2 favorite things that were ever said about me in the Bureau. The first was that I was relentless. It was during one of my performance reviews, and I found that to be one of the highest compliments. I'm not positive that's what it was meant to be, but I loved it. And the second one was someone called me a rogue, and I remember being completely, loving that. Like, I actually remember, again, I don't think that was meant as a compliment, but I remember being completely complimented by that. Just because I think for me, it meant that I did go against the grain and I didn't do necessarily what was expected of me. And during the time as I was leaving, I had a lot of people tell me I was insane. Being an FBI agent and really being employed by the government in general is something where you have some security. You are pretty sure that you're going to keep getting a paycheck. And if you don't, it's because the U.S. government has folded, in which case, we're all in trouble.
There are bigger issues, yes.
And so there is a very high value placed on that security. And that's something that everyone told me I was crazy to be walking away from. Of course, people talked about pensions and retirement plans. And to be honest, to this day, I don't actually know what I walked away from on that level. I'd never really paid attention to it. And I'm sure a financial advisor somewhere is actually cringing. But it wasn't what mattered in that moment to me. The interesting thing that I found wasn't the people who told me I was crazy, because I knew that was coming. I actually was shocked by the volume of people who said to me, if I had more courage, I would do what you are doing. And to have FBI agents calling you courageous is kind of interesting. It's one of those things, there's a certain amount of, quote, courage that is just an expected part of that job. But for them to be feeling that I was making a courageous, bold move was quite the compliment, but also a little bit terrifying.
Yeah, I bet. But you went ahead and did it anyway. That's the other
I
thing,
did.
right? Regardless of all of that, you went ahead and did it anyway. Yeah, I love it.
Never been a lot that was put in front of me that was scary that I didn't decide I was going to make an attempt anyway. And that served me even today. So, I ended up at McChrystal Group and working for, one of the world's most well-known generals in the U.S. military. Stan McChrystal was a 4-star before he retired, and he overturned the way Joint Special Operations Command actually interacts with each other to fight the war on terror. I mean, this is a man who has made such an impact in the world. And I had such an incredible honor to sit at the feet of some of the world's just most incredible military leaders. And so I look in and say, it was amazing to be an FBI agent. My peers, my friends out of that piece of my life are some of the most amazing individuals in our nation. And then I take a step further and I got to sit then at the feet of some of our nation's greatest military leaders and learn leadership and learn organizational psychology and how to run an organization and how to help companies set their strategy, live their strategy. Just all these little things that I didn't know until I sat there and heard, General McChrystal, Dave Silverman, Chris Fussell, all of these great, great leaders talking. And I just would sit there, especially when we did client events. I was the one at the back of the room frantically taking notes on the same speech I'd heard 5 times, right? Because there was something else in it that I didn't want to miss. And so I grew so much there in ways I never would have grown had I stayed put. So even though it was scary, even though it was terrifying, even though it was outside of the norm and all of those things, I absolutely would not have grown into the person I've become if it weren't for that scary leap.
So the growth was exponential.
I've learned about myself that about 4 to 6 months of really hardcore growth necessitates a solid month of just sitting still and actually literally boycotting it all.
Going on strike. I love it.
I do. I have to go on strike for about a month. Every 4 to 6, I have to go when I'm in a hard growth curve. Every 4 to 6, I need a month of strike, and then I go back into the curve.
Yeah. Well, and you're rested and you're prepared, right? And that you've had an opportunity to kind of consume and reflect, and then you're like, okay, let's do this again. Go. Yeah.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
That.
Let's keep on charging.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. Okay. So you were at McChrystal, and then you decided to take another leap.
Yeah, because, it's not scary enough to leave the government. Why not leave private industry, which is significantly less secure than the government, but definitely 100% more secure than entrepreneurship. And again, people are starting to think I'm crazy. It's okay. Yeah, I basically the consulting life starts to wear on you. And you love being on the road. You love seeing new parts of the world, but I have 4 dogs. I have a husband. I have stepkids. You have a life at home. And I started to really miss that. And I started to realize that what happened is I actually realized my friends had stopped calling me to see if I could hang out. For me, that was a moment where I went, oh my God, the people who matter to me it's not even that they aren't that they understand I'm not available. They literally have stopped trying. Right. And that just kind of broke something in me. And I said, nothing's worth that. There's no career that's worth losing the people in my life. Because if I lose the people, then I don't, again, for a person like myself who's all about connection and all about people, it just wasn't going to be okay.
That was too high of a price.
It was way too high of a price. Yeah. It was way too high of a price. And so that's when I said, okay, I have to figure out, where do I go next? What do I want to be when I grow up is kind of how I started asking the question. And I didn't know. And I had been an FBI agent, and that was great and wonderful. And how do you explain to anyone what being an FBI agent translates to in the real world? That there's not like a real world job description for FBI agent who speaks Russian. It's not out there. Other than FBI agent who speaks Russian, and I already blew that off, so that wasn't a good thing. And after you leave the bureau, you have 2 years where you can be like, hey, I changed my mind. I'm coming back. And so I decided that I was done at 2 years and 3 months. So if I'd have wanted to go back, I'd have had to go back through the academy, and I was not doing that again.
Okay.
And that's if I'd wanted to. I really was ready for this leap. And so I didn't want to be a consultant because being a consultant is what I'd burned out on. So if I wanted to keep being a consultant, I just stayed where I was. So then where do you go? And so I started a self-discovery process, and it actually was great for me, but also extremely difficult because I was in that moment of, if I don't know who I am by now, a lot closer to 40 than I am 30. We will, leave it there. If I don't know who I am by now, and I don't know who I want to be by now, do I just have ADD? Am I incapable of holding a job for a long time? Is there something wrong with me? And of course, all of that doubt started to just kind of take over. And I was scared, and I was frustrated, and I was insecure, and all of those things, none of which, by the way, are good when you're trying to find a new job. None of those traits will get you the new job, if you were wondering. So here I sat, just lost and confused. And I started seeking counsel from others. So mentorship, informational interviews, anyone who would talk to me and help me figure this out, I was on the phone with. So I ended up in a Veterati call. And Veterati is a platform for veterans and military spouses where you can get mentorship from other people who essentially have said, I've been there and I'm willing to help. So I signed up. I urge everyone, and this is shameless plug, veterati.com/higherserved is my portal. I urge everyone who wants to give back in some way to be a mentor. You can do it as little as 1 hour a month, and it changes lives. So signed up for Veterati, picked a mentor who was a military spouse who she said something in her bio about having switched careers a bunch of times because when they moved, they had to switch careers. And so she basically said, if you're looking at figuring out how to become the next version of you or something like that, call me. And I was like, yes, that is me. Click. I want to talk to you. And in that conversation, she said something that I've carried with me and I think has changed how I see transition. I was being, I was unconfident. I was stressing out. And she said, I want you to stop thinking about the titles, stop thinking about the roles you've held, stop thinking about FBI and consultant and banker and all of these different things that you're calling yourself, and take a step back and figure out who you were in all of those roles and what is the constant about you that showed up in every role.
I love that. Yeah.
Right? It's just all of a sudden I just took this breath and I went, I'm a connector, Jen. It just came out, right? I didn't even think about it. I said, I'm a connector. She's like, okay, talk to me. And I said, well, when I ran task forces, I went through it all, right?
Yeah.
I was connecting people here and connecting people here. And at McChrystal Group, that was what we were all about, is connecting different parts of the organization to each other so it could run more functionally. It's just always been about connection. And she's like, okay, then you're a connector who has worn the title of banker and FBI agent and consultant. That moment is when I went, okay, as long as I am a connector, I'm okay. I just have to be connecting. And so from there, it became a matter of, okay, where can I connect people to each other? And really my goal as a human being, right? I believe that if we connect each other to one another, that we can actually avoid excess hardship, excess challenge. And I believe that difficulty is good for us, but I think we all have this place where difficulty starts to break us. And I believe that I can truly change lives by stepping in that place and saying, you know what, I'm going to make this piece easier. You need to talk to so-and-so. And knowing what people need and what people have and being able to put them in the same place and say, you need to be together because it's going to make everybody happier and everybody healthier. And that is, I firmly believe, what I bring to this world, right? I really, really, and I have story after story of times when it's literally saved lives. And I have story after story where, you can chase it down 7 Degrees of Kevin Bacon and see it, you know?
Yeah. But one of the things that keeps coming up, Jean, is that there's this common thread of you serving your community, serving your country, changing one person's life is really what it comes down to. Like your I don't want to assume that it's your personal mission, but you kind of wake up every day with you are going to change someone's life today. It could be served in the form of a 10-minute conversation where someone has for a long time really struggled with trying to take that next step. And then, a 10-minute conversation for you, and all of a sudden opportunities open up. And it's not because you hold the exclusive key to that, but you just, because of your connections and your passion for connecting people, is that you have that ability to be like, you're not standing alone on this. I'm going to help. That's fantastic. Oh my gosh. I love this. I love this. And again, I don't want to assume that.
No, it is. It is. I really, I am a very blessed person. My mom grew up in abject poverty. My dad's father is a disabled Navy veteran who couldn't work the bulk of my dad's life. So his mom, in a day and age when women weren't the sole breadwinner, his mom was. And he grew up on the streets of LA playing stickball. I mean, literally that's where my parents come from. And they made some insane sacrifices throughout my life to give me every opportunity. And other people made crazy sacrifices to give me every opportunity. And so I'm of the belief that I have been given so very much, and how dare I not give back, right? So I do have that value. And I believe that we all can change the world by changing a life. It's the small things that I learned from a child and have always carried with. And I figured out that the way I do that is I make those connections. And so then, my business just it really just showed up. And it's so funny because people talk about their business like they talk about a child. And I never understood it until mine just kind of showed up on my doorstep and said, hey, here I am. And it just, I can't even explain. It wasn't like my whole life I'd said, I'm going to one day be a business owner. That wasn't it. The first time someone said, you should be a business owner, I actually laughed in their face, like, ha, 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 you're an idiot. What are you thinking? Laughed in their face. I take that back.
You were right. Some humble pie. Yes.
My bad. And so as I was looking at where can I use this connection skill, somebody said, headhunting. And I went, headhunting? Well, that's kind of cool. I like talking to people. I like putting people in touch. Okay. And so then someone said, well, to be a headhunter, you have to have specialty. Well, how do you pick a specialty? And so they said, well, who do you know a lot of? And of course, the first thing out of my mouth is veterans, because, my parents are vets. My husband's still in the reserves. All of his friends come to my house every year for a reunion. Everyone I worked with in law enforcement, the bulk are veterans. My life is just full of people who have served their nation. And so I said, well, I know veterans. And so that's where the journey began. And where it ended was realizing that really the first thing we have to ask veterans as they transition, and anyone leaving government service, is not about what you can do, but the same thing I was challenged with, right? What do you want to do? And what will fulfill you? And I find when I ask that question, I am usually the first person in someone's life who has asked that. And when you're dealing with a 24-year-old, that's kind of a bummer. Yeah. But when you're dealing with a 44-year-old who's retiring, and you're the first person to say what is going to bring you joy when you wake up in the morning, it's this crazy, powerful moment when they just look at you and go, oh my God, no one's ever asked me that before. And you're like, all right, well, let's figure it out. They're like, I don't know how to answer that. And so, I've got my professional coaching certification. We dive through that. We had a client, they wanted someone with this particular skill set. We had a person with that particular skill set. And I did not refer them to the client because he told me that's not what was going to make him fulfilled.
Interesting. You not only asked him the question, you helped work through to the answer for him, but you also were smart enough to know that even though in theory it should have been a good connection, that you heard what that veteran had to say. You heard him, and that you took that to heart, right? Because It's easy to say, oh, you know, of course you should do this because you tick all the boxes for this. But ultimately, if someone isn't going to find joy, then no one's really going to benefit from that.
Well, and that's the thing, right? Is so I really specialize in your larger small business, your smaller, medium-sized businesses, right? That kind of sweet spot from 500 to 1,500 people. And so I have to think not only about, getting it right as far as doing my job and getting paid and keeping the business running, which every business owner thinks about. But I have to think bigger. I have to think about my client because, the cost of hiring the wrong person it's estimated about, I don't know, I saw a figure today. It's like 2.5 times that person's annual salary. Mm-hmm. So small businesses can't hardly afford the annual salary to begin with, let alone 2.5 times it. Right. So my client's financial outcomes are on the line with me getting it right and finding them someone who's going to stick around. My client's internal culture is on the line because culture can be so very affected. But in a large organization, one bad hire affects a piece of the organization. It doesn't take the whole organization down. In a smaller organization, one bad hire has it's not ripple effects anymore. It's waves. Mm-hmm. And so I have to think about, for my clients, making sure that we give them someone who is going to be coming to work every day, joyful that they're there. And then for my veterans and my military spouses that I work with, at the same time, these are my people. This is my tribe. And I will not do wrong by my tribe on purpose. And I believe that putting someone in a job that I know is not going to be a long-term fulfilling work for them, I'm doing wrong by my tribe. Mm. And I know what it is to ask yourself, what do I do next? And I know what it is to have those questions. And even though I don't doubt any step along the way, every time I had to ask myself that question, it was hard. And so I know what that does to the psyche. And I know how it makes you second guess yourself. Mm. And so I would not want one of our nation's heroes to have to ask themselves that question over and over again because I didn't get it right when I had the chance.
I love that. And I know that you had mentioned your clients being on the business side, but your tribe are also your clients as well. That's great.
And it's, I had one of my employers where they actually call me and Kate said, Jean, I need another Yuri. Find me another Yuri. Right. And then I have another client, they're a franchise business. And one of the franchisees calls me the other day. He's like, you got this guy. His name's Chad. You found him for so-and-so. And I'm like, yeah, I need a Chad. Go use a Chad. And I think it's the coolest thing when my clients call and literally say, we need another one of exactly what you already did.
Do that again. Yes. Right? I love that. And it ultimately, that personalizes it too, right? It takes it from just being a job description, like a series of tactics or tasks. It is, we are looking for the quality and the characteristics and the values and the integrity of this person that you have introduced us to as previously. And if you have a pocket full of those people, we want to meet them. You've got a ready-made talent pool, right, of those people. So let's actually talk about the benefits of hiring the veterans that you're working with. Because if we're looking for a Chad and a Yuri, what are we looking for? Because I have to say, we would like to probably be introduced to a Chad and a Yuri if they're getting glowing reviews from your clients.
Yeah. So I think that if you've met a vet, if you've interacted with, a couple, you're going to recognize that they're pretty, intensely driven. And that's generally across the board. You're also dealing with people who, since the first day they put on their boots, have been learning leadership. I actually heard someone describe it the other day, and it all just kind of became real for me. They were talking about how in their platoon, they took turns being platoon leaders. And the reason is because if your leader falls in combat, somebody has to have practiced leading enough that they can step up and take charge. Mm. And now that's a sobering thing to think about. because, right, we don't like thinking about people dying in front of us. But when you also recognize that that is how our military is trained, they have always trained so that if something happens and somebody takes out the leader and for some reason that person is not available, think about the time somebody ends up in cancer treatment for 6 months and then comes back, right? In the real world. That is a very real situation any of us could find ourselves in. And your military members have all been put in that position from the very first day they laced on their boots. So they're great leaders, but they're also amazing followers, which we also need. They work amazingly in teams, yet you can send many of them off on an individual task and be in good shape. They provide a versatility, but I think what I am most amazed with is their trainability. What people don't realize is the amount of training that happens. And I see this because my husband's constantly going on a training mission of some sort, or, they're constantly in training. And in the Bureau, we did this. We were constantly in training. So we would go to firearms to qualify on our weapons. And then we would go into the shoot house. And in the shoot house, we would practice with guns that were like the weapons, the bullets were basically fake bullets with paint in them. So it hurt to get shot, but not so badly that you broke the skin usually. And so we would practice, and somebody's the bad guy and somebody's the good guy, and you go in and you do tactics, and you then learn, okay, if you run into this situation, this is what you need to think about. Then we would go into defensive tactics and we roll around the ground and do hand-to-hand combat. The military is always doing that. Before my husband deployed, he went and learned how to blow doors open with bombs. Why not? Because everyone needs that skill set. But they're always in training, and also they change jobs. So my husband was trained to be in the infantry, but he has also been in recruiting, and he's also been in an engineer company. So he has been a lot of different things in the Corps. And so what we forget is how very trainable they are. And so as I was reading a report the other day about, small businesses and their challenges in hiring, is they're struggling to find people who have the right skill sets. So what that means is you're gonna probably have to hire someone who doesn't have every skill you're looking at. So you need someone who can acquire that skill as quickly as possible. Mm-hmm. And your veterans who've been training their whole life, who are accustomed to on-the-job training, who are accustomed to learning and adapting in the moment, that trainability is a thing they already have. You just got to get the skills in front of them. So if you're looking at a civilian who doesn't have all the skills and a vet who doesn't have all the skills, your best bet is that vet, because he's been or she has been practicing to learn their whole career.
That is not something that's obviously written in a job description. What is your trainability? Right. I don't know. I've looked at a lot of job descriptions during my career and written a lot of them. And I can honestly say that trainability was not a core competency. So let's actually talk about some of those transferable skills. Like, I think trainability is obviously one of the top three, right? Yeah. There's always a lot of conversation when it comes to when veterans decide to leave the military and transition into civilian life, in identifying and being able to effectively communicate those transferable skills. So what are some of those three actions that folks can take today? But also, not only from the veteran side of things, Jean, but also for hiring managers to understand that if they're presented with a veteran or the opportunity to connect with a veteran about a job, that they're able to identify them even if the veteran isn't able to translate it into civilian terms. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And it's two sides of the coin, right? It's funny because when I close my eyes and I think about where higher served fits in this whole equation, I actually see a bridge. Like I physically see a bridge when I close my eyes and think about my business. And what I believe is that the veterans have to come across that bridge a little ways because they are moving into a new world and a new realm, and they need to start taking steps in. But I also firmly believe that we as civilians in the private sector have to also come across that bridge. And I believe that reaching across is what makes a company military passionate, not just military friendly. Friendly kind of says, we'll put down the drawbridge and we won't build a wall here. You can come across this bridge. But I think a military passionate company actually starts walking across it themselves. So how do we do that from both sides? To start with the veterans kind of side of this coin, and the answer is actually going to be very similar on both, it's start a conversation. I learned Russian, right? It was really awkward to speak Russian in front of a native Russian speaker. I felt stupid. I felt moronic. I hated it. And I had to do it if I wanted to learn to speak Russian. So to a degree, we are speaking two different languages. We are talking military, we are talking civilian. And so if you want to learn to speak the other person's language, you must hear it spoken. And you must try to speak it, even though you're going to suck at it in the beginning. And so as veterans are trying to figure out how to transition, Google everything you can, read everything you can, start sucking up knowledge hardcore about the private sector, learning about different industries, learning about different job titles, just learning everything you can. And it kind of starts broad and starts to narrow in as you learn more, but also get in conversation. And so there's two ways that I encourage vets to get into conversation. The first is the easiest and most non-threatening, and that's Veterati. And again, Veterati is this portal where all these people have signed up and said, I want to be a mentor. And you go in and you say, I need a mentor. And you click on the time that person's available. The computer calls you, it calls them. Like, it could not physically be any easier. like this is the shortcut. Oh my God. I don't know how everyone doesn't know this exists, because seriously, it's amazing.
And so that it sounds like it's the easy button. Right.
It's the easy button. It's the easy button. So start easy. Don't do it the hard way first. Start the easy button. And then as you get some confidence built up, if there's no one in the Veterati world, or you've gone through all of them, which I may or may not have gone through a lot of Veterati mentors in my transition. So if you've already gone through all the ones that you think you really need in that moment, then you can start going outside of the Veterati mentor network. And then you start just approaching people and saying, hi, you're in a field I'm very interested in. I'm a transitioning veteran, or I'm a military spouse who's ready to settle down. I'm looking for more information. Can you help me? And very few people in this country are going to go, thanks for your service, but I'm super busy today. Right? People aren't saying no.
Right.
So with that, it's getting on the phone, it's having conversations, it's asking the dumb questions. I've asked so many dumb questions in my life. And I think there is something about the humility to ask the dumb question and just be like, you know what? I actually have no idea what ROI means, and you keep saying it. Please tell me what in the world an ROI is. Oh, well, that's a return on investment. What it means is, and so the next conversation you're in, when the person keeps talking about ROI, now you know, and you feel less stupid. And hey, maybe by the fifth conversation, you're like, well, the ROI is, and now you sound like you know what you're talking about. Absolutely do that. So that's the first and the most important thing, right? Is to get in conversation. So from the civilian recruitment side, and from the person who says, I don't have a life that is full of veterans like you, Jean. I don't know any. Or, yeah, my grandfather served in a world war, but he's dead, right? So how do I do this? It's the same thing. Start a conversation. Become a mentor. Again, Veterati, easy button, right? But look around your world. Because of the fact that we've been at war for a very long time, you are bound to know someone with a tie to the military. You know a spouse, you know a vet, you know somebody who has a tie. So go to that person and say, listen, I don't know anything about the military, and it's time I change that. I want to understand your path. Why'd you enlist? Are you an officer, or are you did you enlist? Did you become a non-commissioned officer? What does that even mean? What's your rank? What ranks did you have to go through to get there? What did you have to do to get that? What's your MOS, which is a military occupational specialty, right? They have all their own acronyms too. It's not just us. They're worse. What is that? What's that mean? What do you do? I asked my husband one time, and he gave me this hysterical response that's poetic and full of vulgarity, so I can't share it with you.
Offline. Okay.
But, right. But I basically was like, you keep throwing all these numbers out. I do not know what these stupid numbers mean. What does that mean? And he came back and he's like, we are the infantry. We kill things. And I was like, okay. And then he did this whole paragraph about all of the Marine Corps supporting of how to make the enemy go away. And I was like, oh, I mean, that makes sense. Okay. But I didn't understand. And I could have sat there because we were in conversation with multiple other FBI agents who were also Marines. And it was very public when I wrote back to him and said, I don't know what in the world you're talking about. I could have kept that quiet. I could have not asked, but then I would not know.
Mm-hmm.
And so the other pieces start a conversation from the civilian side. The other wisdom that I give to all of our recruiters and hiring managers is to couch all of your questions, your interview questions, in terms of leadership. Veterans are historically horrible at talking about themselves. So I is not a word that comes out of their mouth. It's we. And when in the civilian world, someone is being interviewed and they keep talking about we have trouble recognizing that as their accomplishment. And so if you ask questions in terms of leadership, so tell me about your most proud leadership moment. Right. So then you're going to get, one, a really cool story, two, a lot of information about the way they think, and you're going to actually start to see into the decisions they make. For some reason, that's an easier question to answer than tell me your strengths.
That's key, right? Because from the day they put their boots on, it is we, not I. Because if you're an I, you're likely not going to survive too long. Literally.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Quite often in the private sector and in very specific industries, there is a culture of it has to be I. It has to be I that is at the top. So key for a hiring manager or a recruiter to position those questions from a leadership perspective is going to actually provide them with what they need of not only how this person is going to just have the capability of being able to lead, but also understand the concept of you are stronger as a team than you are as an individual.
Yep.
Yeah. I love this. We need to talk about doing another episode already before we even finish this one. I love it. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to talk to Jean about we're going to continue down the transferable skill route, but we're also going to talk about how you can actually make a connection with veterans during the hiring process, maybe even beyond the questions to be able to get to the root of whether this person would be a good hire for your team, but understanding what are some of the things that can create that deeper connection as they transition from military life into civilian life. So stay tuned. We'll be back in a minute.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to check out the show notes at thecareerq.com, where you can also subscribe to the podcast and sign up for our newsletter.
Welcome back to the Career Q. Today we're talking with Jean South, and Jean is the founder, or shall we say, the big cheese of Hire Served. And we've just had a fascinating conversation about Jean's professional journey and how she came to identify a real need to be able to make that connection between the highly talented veterans that have served our country and connect them with civilian hiring managers and companies. So, Jean, let's talk about developing a connection with a veteran before, during, and after the hiring process. For our hiring managers, recruiters, and folks out there that are looking to connect with the military community, let's talk about what to ask, and probably equally important, if not a little bit more important, of what not to ask during that process.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, you're right. It's the what not to ask is almost more important than the what to ask. But to start with the what to ask, I would say just recognize that yes, they're a veteran, but they are also just like you. I always talk about the fact that we all wake up every day wanting to accomplish the same things, right? We want to leave the world a better place for our children, and we want to make our parents proud of us. And I think that everyone kind of at our heart, that's who we are and what we want. And so recognizing that a vet is doing the same thing and has been doing those same things. They want to take care of their babies. They want to leave the world safe for their children. And they want to make their parents proud of the name that they've passed on. And so getting to know them as a person is the biggest what to ask. So where'd you grow up? How many kids do you have? These are things we ask each other anyway, right? So don't be afraid by the veteran thing. And don't be afraid by the fact that veterans tend to be a little stoic on the outside. I always joke that they're kind of like chocolate covered cherries, right? Like that hard exterior, but you break through and there's like a squishy inside. And I'm telling you, they don't want you to know that. True. They are all heart of gold and squishy on the inside. So, ask anything you would ask a normal coworker. What not to ask. There are questions. I got them as FBI agent. Did you kill anyone? Don't ask this. Please don't. If they did kill someone, they're probably not thoroughly comfortable talking with you about it. They may not have told their own spouse. So that's not a conversation starter. It's a conversation killer. Also, if they really did kill someone, do you want to know that? Because that's going to weird you out. Because quite frankly, every time you see them, you're going to think about them killing someone. That's weird, right? So it's not, did you kill someone is not a good question. Were you ever shot or shot at? Also a bad question.
Yeah.
Consequently, I have a colleague. The thing is, these things will come out as you build a relationship. Once they trust you, you'll hear these stories. And I always find I hear them at times that I didn't expect them. So I had a colleague who was a Navy SEAL, and we were sitting around a conference table one day having lunch. And I don't even know what we were talking about. It was absolutely not about combat. And he's sitting there like imparting wisdom. And he says, the second time I was shot, blah, 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 blah. I actually have no idea what else he said. I just stopped. I'm like, I'm sorry, stop talking. What? He's like, yeah, the first time I was shot was such and such and such and such. But then the second time, and you're just sitting there and I'm like, I don't know where I'm at right now. This is not real.
Wow. But it was his reality, right? Like
it was.
Yeah.
He'd been in battle. He'd been shot twice in battle.
Wow.
It was his thing. And I'm like, I don't know if I'd have gone in again after the first time. I feel like I would never have exposed myself to a second.
But you actually, you touched on something where he clearly trusted you to be able to actually share that information, right? Yeah. And that you had a relationship with him that allowed him the comfortability to be able to be like, oh, I know how I'm going to start this conversation. I'm going to lead with the second time I got shot, right? Talk about, ways to lead into a conversation. That's definitely a unique one and one that I'd never heard of before. But it really comes down to that he trusted you. He trusted that he could share this information with you and it wasn't going to jeopardize the relationship that you guys had built. That's awesome.
And that's the key is having that, building the trust. And the way you build trust is the little things. It is the knowing, I know his son's name, I knew his wife's name, things that had nothing to do with him being shot at. And that is when you are going to hear the stories that we do find interesting. I'm sorry, it's interesting. I understand that, there's a little macabreness in that. But we do want to know. But if you start with, how long were you in the sandbox, right? They're going to look at you and be like, you don't know what to say. No, right? No. But I've got 10 years of being married to a Marine. I've got, the bulk of my friends have been in combat. It's actually okay for me to look in and be like, when was the last time you were in the sandbox? Right. Cause I can say that because I have the history, but if I just said that 11 years ago, I would have been laughed at hysterically. And so as you build that relationship, you also build that credibility. And as you understand them enough, they're going to understand you. So again, it's that bridge, right? It's getting closer and closer on that bridge until one day you're walking side by side. And as you are walking side by side, then they start telling you those stories.
That's great. So don't ask if you've killed someone. Don't ask if you've shot anyone or been shot at. Okay.
Yeah. But you just have to understand that that's something they hold very near and dear, and something that I actually don't know about my husband, the times that he has been in combat and actually been shot at. I hear about my husband's combat experience when his friends are here and he tells them and they talk about shared combat experience is the only time I actually learn about when my husband was in combat. So you have to understand, if my husband's not telling me about it, then he probably doesn't want to tell you about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. And it's not intentional. It's just, it's very private.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and it's just it's developing a relationship with another human being.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about, I know that you have more than one or two examples of some vets who have really kind of nailed it when it comes to the transition. So these are the people that I I feel like we need to interview these people as well, because they're living and breathing and have been able to find that place where it does give them joy, because they found out that the answer to that question was. So who comes to mind?
Definitely.
Yeah.
So I'm going to tell Yuri's story because it kind of makes me almost cry. And then this is the cool part about changing lives for a living, is I actually know I changed these guys' lives. It's the coolest thing. So Yuri, his family, they immigrated from Ukraine, and all he ever wanted to be was a U.S. soldier. He became a U.S. soldier and worked in intelligence, and for reasons beyond his control, had to separate from the military. And I believe it's medical, but I don't want to mistell the story. But it wasn't like Yuri was a bad soldier. And it wasn't that Yuri decided to leave the army. And so Yuri was left sitting there going, all I've ever wanted to be a soldier, and now I can't be a soldier. The role that we found for him is actually a contracting role on a U.S. Army base, working directly with the U.S. Army. Yuri is the closest thing to being a soldier that he can be, considering he is not allowed to wear the uniform anymore. And he has literally told us, thank you for getting me as close to what I've always wanted to be as I ever will be able to be. And then we talked to his new employer the other day, and they held a new hire lunch for all the new hires for the whole 2016. And Yuri is one of the newest ones on staff. And she said to me, and this is the one who was like, get me another one. She said, it was really amazing because he's so happy. And he's actually the one who was going around to the other new hires and getting to know their names and making sure they knew each other and making sure they were excited about the organization. Like, he's the one who was just so infectious about his love for the organization and the task, because we found his why and we got him in a place that he could be what he always wanted to be when he grew up.
I love that.
Right?
That's awesome. Well, and that's going to make you feel great about that connection, right? Yeah. Like, you helped him find his why, and then he found the home that allowed him to be able to live that why on a daily basis. That's awesome. I love that.
Yeah.
All right. So what can our listeners do today? They've heard your fascinating story and they're on board with being military passionate, but what can they do today to assist veterans and ultimately their families as well through the transition to civilian life and their career?
So there's two things. One is, if you know someone who's a transitioning veteran or military spouse that's trying to find a job. So first, start with who you know, right? If you know someone, reach out to them and literally just offer them the opportunity to sit down and talk about private sector. Explain it, break it down, use little words, it's okay. We're not going to get feelings hurt. Because we don't know the words. Like, we don't understand it when we first walk out of service. So talk to us and explain and just give us a lay of the land. So number one is do what you can in your community. The next piece, veterati.com/hire-served. You do not have to be a veteran. You do not have to be associated with the military. In fact, we love our civilians because you know what the civilian world looks like and we don't. You go, and within 5 minutes, you can be signed up. It uses your LinkedIn profile. You say who you want to talk to. You say how often. And then it puts you in kind of our universe. So as we are coaching veterans and starting to say, okay, as you're starting your new life, you should talk to somebody who. So for example, Stacey, if you were one of my mentors, and I'm hoping you will be, shameless plug again.
Yes. I'm again taking copious notes.
But if you were one of the mentors and I was working with a veteran who was literally in this moment of saying, I don't even understand what exists in the world, right? So some veterans calls are like, I love finance, I'm going. All right, finance, we're going to put you on the phone with someone in finance. But we have frequently vets who just don't actually even know what exists. So I might say, you know what, get on the phone with Stacey because she's exposed to all of these people from all of these backgrounds. And she has this cool 30,000 foot view of all the different things you could be when you grow up. And she may not be able to give you nitty gritty detail about any one space, but you could ask her about 5 broad industries and she's probably going to have some knowledge on those industries that someone who is a finance specialist probably couldn't tell you about anything other than finance and maybe 1 or 2 other things.
Right. I love that. So even if you never served or you don't have anyone in your direct network that's served, you still have the ability to be able to change a veteran's life. If you're out there and you didn't think that you'd be specifically interested in the military spectrum, consider it as a professional development opportunity for yourself. Ugh, I love
Absolutely.
this. And let it go on record. I will put it in the show notes as well, at careerq.com. I am going to sign up on veterati.com, whack hire served. It is on my own professional development plan for 2017 to open myself up to more mentorship opportunities. And I have officially found my first one of 2017. Jean, again, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much. When I'm in Philly, we're definitely going out for dinner. You have to make it out to Seattle. We'll do whatever we can to get connected and to be able to continue this conversation.
Absolutely. This has been great.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. Check us out at thecareerq.com, and we will talk to you next time.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Be sure to head on over to thecareerq.com where you can get more information, show notes, and related articles to today's topic. Also, if you like what you're hearing, head on over to iTunes, subscribe to the podcast, and make sure you leave us a rating and review. We'd love to hear your feedback. Thanks again.
The Career Q podcast is produced by Lens Group Media and recorded at Jack Straw Cultural Center in the lovely Seattle, Washington.